I'm going to call the meeting to order. I'm John Clark. I'm the chair of the House Energy Committee, and a couple of my colleagues are here that are interested in this subject matter some for specific reasons, some for an overview, and that is I'll let them introduce themselves.
My name is J.J. Johnson. I represent the 16th Representative District, and I have concerns about this issue also.
I'm Ed Osinski. I'm the representative of the 24th District in Newark. The rail affects part of my district, so I have some questions about safety issues. And I'm also on the Public Safety Committee.
State Representative Charles Potter Jr., City of Wilmington, 1st District. I have concerns about it because I'm trying to right now my office.
Okay, unless other legislators come in, I want to start this meeting because I am very impressed by how many captains of the industry and their representatives are here for this very important discussion. And I just want to say that this wasn't provoked by one single thing. It was provoked by a lot of citizen constituent concerns and recent history that has happened with the now ever-expanding delivery of food by rail, and certainly how that affects communities, how that can be healthy or unhealthy or mitigated at the safety of it. And all of these things, I think that I've tried to assemble an invitation list, and I really am grateful that all of you responded, to try to put a caption from your experience on the issue. I have a PowerPoint, very briefly, especially a site PowerPoint, and the purpose of it is to show you, these have been sent to me by constituents. And I just want to give you an overview. Some of them may not involve your particular department, some of it may, and that is certainly left to your statements that you have, what you would like to address, and I will try to keep this where as you step up and want to make a statement about something on this agenda, that we will entertain if there are questions on pertinent, and the committee members will do that then. If not, because some of the questions may be asked at a later date or may be submitted for your consideration. I'm not here expecting an answer off the top of your head. If something comes up as a surprise. I'm not in the business of sensationalizing this thing. It's too serious. That matter, and my constituents are paramount importance to me, and certainly the survival and the flourishing of your businesses, and the business of other first responders and other things like that. I'm going to show this very quickly, just go through it, and then I'm going to call up we had two that may have to leave early, two representatives or one of them, and we'll call them in that order, and we'll try to stay to the agenda. Okay, so the first photo here is train running through the Newark area. And this is a crude carrying regional Southern train, keeping its speed limit at 50. The purpose, someone said this to me, is because although that is certainly admirable that we keep that speed limit, if someone goes by at 70 or 80, the big question is, what happens if something like that goes wrong? And a lot of these circumstances, this is the proximity of homes in the area to where these cars are often stored outside of Star Campus. Here's another one. And these kids send me these, the next one, the playground. You can see the car background about 180 feet. I'm just trying to express here through my constituents the concern they have for what are they facing as any kind of a threat or not threat, or something that can be remedied, or subject to some other alternative. Now here's the area railroads in Newcastle County, and I think the Gulf Sun CSX are familiar with these lines more than I am. This is an overview. I just come to the Newark here, and I apologize. Most of my information comes from the Newark area because that's my constituency, the 25th district. But I think we can all appreciate. There's Representative Johnson, J.J. Johnson's district, the train lines and bed running to it. and this is a bare area, so it's not limited to one area. It's certainly a traversing all of the state of Delaware is something that's necessary, but I just wanted to show the impact, potential impact that it could have on the lives of the citizens of Delaware. And this is a layout of the PDF refinery. I can't control for taking it. I don't know if this is some kind of homeland security thing. This is another one. Go back one that day. This is a site where in the Newark area too, and there's homes that we saw in a picture right over there off that horizon. And then this is the storage area that sometimes, and also there's trains traverse that on the Crude area, the storage area, right on the Star campus site. And now, go through these quickly because I just wanted you to see these, because this is what provokes us to have a dialogue. These are not intended to show you the norm of what's going to happen. These are just intended to show you the incidents recently that have occurred. And I think that this committee would be very interested in knowing, you know, are we working to mitigate this situation? Is this a circumstance provoked by more rail traffic? As we all know, we are having much more rail traffic now delivering of crude product. And are we prepared to ensure protection for people, or move forward looking for protection for the state? So I think the first start of this agenda would be, I was approached by Mr. Julian from Norfolk Southern and Mr. Brian Root from CSX. Would like to make a little presentation, so okay. Go, Mr. Julian.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is David Julian. I'm Vice President of Safety and Environmental Protection for Norfolk Southern, a position I've held since 2009. I joined the railroad 43 years ago and served in a variety of positions in our operations, marketing divisions, and corporate subsidiaries. Before I respond to any questions you may have, there are a few important points I'd like to make about the movement of crude oil by rail. I've also submitted written testimony that comprehensively addresses many of the issues that might come up this afternoon. As background, Norfolk Southern is one of the largest freight railroads in North America. We operate over 20,000 route miles of track in 22 states, primarily east of the Mississippi River, including approximately 200 miles in Delaware. We have approximately 30,000 employees overall, and including more than 120 in Delaware. Specifically, as it relates to the movement of crude oil by rail, on an average day, Norfolk Southern generally operates 2 loaded unit trains of crude oil into Delaware to the PBF refinery in Delaware City. These trains get to the refinery over 2 routes. Our primary route is via Delmarva Secondary between Newark and Porter, which currently has a maximum speed limit of 30 miles an hour, and the Raybold running track, which has a maximum speed of 15 miles an hour. Our secondary route utilizes our Shellpot secondary line in Wilmington and the Newcastle secondary through Port of Wilmington area, then south to Porter to access the Raybold running track. Trains utilizing the secondary route do not exceed 30 miles an hour. The movement of crude oil by rail has grown tremendously over the past few years. Between 2000 and 2013, the U.S. rail industry originated 825,000 carloads of crude oil, and almost half of those carloads were from 2013 alone. 99.993% of those carloads for the entire industry arrived at their destination without a release caused by an accident. So for context, when discussing today how to move crude oil more safely, we're trying to address 7/1000ths of a percentage point of risk from an industry-wide perspective. With regard to Norfolk Southern's operations, we have not had a single accident related to release of crude oil on our lines in the state of Delaware during this time frame. And even with those successful safety performance metrics, we're always seeking ways to improve. Norfolk Southern and the rail industry have been proactive in doing just that. For example, there are various operating restrictions in place to address the safe movement of hazmat over the nation's rails. These include regulatory requirements as well as voluntary industry operating practices, having speed restrictions, train inspection requirements, and train handling provisions for key trains, which encompass the majority of the crude oil traffic. And several emergency orders have been issued by the U.S. Department of Transportation that collectively require a host of safety-driven mandates that apply to crude oil, such as securement plans and packaging requirements. Another area for which the rail industry is being proactive is tank car design. In March 2011, the Association of American Railroads petitioned the U.S. Department of Transportation, PHMSA, Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, to adopt more stringent requirements for new tank cars used to transport packing group 1 and 2 hazmat, which include most crude oils. These tougher standards call for more puncture resistance through use of a thicker tank car shell or jacket, extra protective head shields at both ends of the cars, and additional protection for the fittings on top of the car. In July 2011, after PHMSA did not act on this proposal, the rail industry proactively and voluntarily adopted the AAR, what the AAR had proposed to PHMSA as the basis for new standards for tank cars to carry crude oil. These new standards, referred to as CPC 1232, apply to new tank cars ordered after October 1, 2011. And to date, about 18,000 tank cars have been built to this tougher CPC 1232 standard. More recently, in November of 2013, the rail industry filed comments in a PHMSA rulemaking proceeding recommending adoption of safety standards even more stringent than the CPC 1232 for new tank cars being built to transport crude. The latest recommendation also called for aggressively retrofitting or phasing out older tank cars, including the CPC 1232 cars and the older DOT 111 cars, which are a legacy fleet. Those specifically used to transport crude oil. The November 2013 filing recognizes that input is needed from shippers and tank car manufacturers to determine the parameters of a phase-out program and to identify the retrofits that should be required. Over the past several months, there have been also numerous discussions between the rail industry and several agencies in Washington about further enhancing safety on crude moving by rail. On January 16th, top leadership from the nation's railroads and oil production industries met with U.S. Secretary of Transportation Anthony Fox. As a result of this meeting, on February 21st, U.S. DOT and the rail industry announced a rail operations safety initiative that goes above and beyond the AAR Circular OT55 and the Federal Railroad Administration emergency orders. The railroad is committed to institute various new voluntary practices regarding the movement of crude oil by rail, including additional rail inspections, trackside detectors, and providing $5 million in 2014 to develop and conduct a specialized crude by rail training program for our emergency responders. Norfolk Southern fully supports this DOT operations rail safety initiative, and we are a formal subscriber to that agreement. Finally, let me touch briefly on emergency preparedness and response. Norfolk Southern and the rail industry have a vast amount of resources and expertise that is dedicated not only to preventing incidents, but also prepared to respond to an incident in the event that one occurs. Norfolk Southern has well-established, robust emergency preparedness training and response programs. We train our own personnel as well as thousands of emergency responders each year. We have a hazmat group, an environmental operations group, and an industrial hygiene group, their own emergency response duty 24/7, 365. In 2013, we trained more than 4,800 state and local emergency responders at 108 locations across our network, including over 120 emergency responders in Delaware. In August, we are going to participate in a full-scale drill with emergency responders in Newcastle County to train for staged incidents involving crude oil. These efforts speak strong to our active support of the Transportation Community Awareness and Emergency Response Program, TransCare. Our programs to train state and local responders have resulted in us receiving the TransCare National Achievement Award 13 times. And in closing, Norfolk Southern shares the urgency of this committee and the public at large regarding the need to augment the safe transport of crude by rail. We will continue to work with the government, shippers, oil industry, customers, and other stakeholders as necessary to identify additional safety-enhancing steps that will make the North American Rail Network even safer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And now I'm going to have CSX make their presentation, then we'll have a question or two for my own clarification and the committee members having clarification. In the meantime, I have the two more legislators join us. Would you please introduce yourself, gentlemen?
Ted Duke, State Representative.
Mike Moore.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate it. Good afternoon. CSX Transportation is grateful for the opportunity this afternoon to discuss the safe transportation of crude by rail with the Delaware House of Representatives Energy Committee. My name is Brian Rohde. I'm the Regional Vice President for State Government Affairs for CSX. I come to CSX with a background in public safety. In addition to serving in the United States Marine Corps as a prosecutor in Richmond for many years, I most recently served as Virginia Secretary of Public Safety, a cabinet-level position with oversight of the Virginia Department of Emergency Management, the Virginia State Police, and the Virginia National Guard, among other agencies. I'm accompanied today by my colleague, Gabe Treesh, who is the Director of Chemical Safety. Gabe's held a number of positions at CSX with responsibility for infrastructure protection and security partnerships, environmental compliance and sustainability, hazardous materials compliance, and outreach. He presently serves as the company's hazardous materials safety and regulatory compliance liaison. At CSX, we understand that the subject of today's hearing is a topic of great concern for communities in Delaware and across the United States. When compared with only a few years ago, Mr. Chairman, as you mentioned, energy products are moving in greater volumes across America's freight networks. As a result of this growth, CSX, as well as other railroads like Norfolk Southern, have taken independent actions and continue working in partnership with our customers, the Association of American Railroads, first responders, policymakers, regulators, and others to help ensure the safe transport of energy products and to do what we do safely, even more safely. CSX's first priority is the safety of its employees and the communities in which we operate. We recognize that with hazardous materials especially, even a single accident is one too many. CSX operates and maintains 21,000 miles of track across 23 states and 2 Canadian provinces and operates on average 1,300 trains a day in our network. Our footprint in Delaware is relatively small. We operate and maintain only about 25 miles of track in Delaware. While our primary crude oil unit train route does not traverse the state of Delaware, CSX does occasionally run small blocks of crude oil cars in our merchandise train service through Delaware, and at times we use the CSX yard in Wilmington to stage crude oil cars heading in Philadelphia. CSX, like many other railroads, reinvests heavily in our rail and infrastructure to ensure a safe, reliable, and efficient rail network. Long-term, CSX is committed to invest 16 to 17% of revenue back into the business. This private reinvestment in infrastructure, safety, and technology helps reduce the number of derailments and hazmat accidents. Beyond these investments in infrastructure and safety, CSX continues to work with state and local officials, as well as emergency first responders, to focus on several key areas: prevention, preparedness, as well as mitigation. In terms of prevention, CSX is subject to rigorous FRA safety regulations, as are all railroads, and also works to ensure that all of its employees receive the training necessary to continue to safely move trains from origin to destination. CSX is proud of its 32,000 employees who, in 2013, were responsible for the company having one of its safest years on record, both in terms of personal injury reduction as well as train accident prevention. Recently, a number of voluntary and formal regulatory actions have been introduced in the railroad industry to help prevent train accidents from occurring, and some of those were alluded to by my colleague, Mr. Julian. On February 20th, 2014, the U.S. Department of Transportation and major U.S. freight railroads, including CSX, executed an agreement instituting new voluntary operating practices to help ensure the continued safe transportation of unit trains of crude oil. Under this agreement, CSX and subscribing railroads will take a number of steps to enhance safety, including additional track inspections, enhanced train braking capabilities, improved route safety analysis, lower speeds, and increased coordination with local communities along key crude oil routes. On August 8th of 2013, the FRA issued Emergency Order 28. This emergency order required that railroads take immediate action to ensure the safety of any train carrying hazardous materials that is left unattended. In response, CSX completed an in-depth review of its operating procedures. While CSX already met or exceeded many requirements for the movement of hazardous materials, those practices were reviewed and in some cases adjusted and enhanced in order to meet or exceed the specific language of the emergency order. On May 5th of 2013, the railroad industry voluntarily enhanced its long-standing recommended practices for the transportation of hazardous materials. The change includes making crude oil unit trains part of the industry's definition of a hazmat key train. In terms of preparedness, although shipping hazardous materials by rail is the safest of the surface transportation modes, inherent risks do exist. That is why The U.S. railroad industry has a long history of working with emergency first responders and emergency planners in how to respond to a rail-related emergency. CSX is especially proud of its preparedness training and outreach programs. Since 2009, CSX has trained about 145 emergency first responders in the state of Delaware. Knowing what hazardous materials are being transported by rail through a community has been a question asked by public officials and emergency planning specialists for many years, and CSX has been providing that information for more than 20 years. The best example of how CSX provides this information in near real time is our Secure Now train and commodity monitoring system. CSX's Secure Now system and our approach to information sharing helps emergency management and security officials prepare for, and if needed, respond to emergency situations. CSX is engaged the Delaware Emergency Management Agency, DEMA, to discuss installation of the Secure Now system. Representatives from CSX are in fact scheduled to meet with DEMA officials this week to further those discussions. CSX also provides information on request to local fire and emergency planning officials on the specific types and amounts of hazardous materials that move through their communities. Finally, in terms of mitigation, should an incident involving hazardous materials occur on CSX's railroad, the company will respond with trained personnel and specialized resources and equipment to handle the incident. CSX will also work closely with the community, local, state, emergency first responders who we recognize are in charge of the site of an emergency. Additionally, CSX has a unique dedicated standard of care protocol that ensures that impacts to the community resulting from a rail incident are addressed promptly and professionally, with the first priority being the safety and welfare of the affected community. The development of shale oil represents a tremendous opportunity economically, allows the country to move closer to energy independence, and allows us to grow our economy and create jobs. Rail has a critical role in this opportunity, but with this role comes great responsibility, and CSX will continue to work to make the safe transportation of hazardous materials even safer. So we commend the chairman and the House committee on your leadership and appreciate the opportunity to come here today and discuss this very important topic. As is evident from both the safety improvements required by the U.S. Department of Transportation and as voluntary actions undertaken by CSX as well as Norfolk Southern and other U.S. freight railroads, much has already been done to enhance the safety of transporting crude by rail in the state of Delaware. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, gentlemen. I have a few questions just to follow up.
Yes.
You said there were 18,000 new cars now that are being used.
That's correct.
Norfolk Southern? Only on your Norfolk Southern line?
No, that's in the national.
No.
Yes, there.
Do you have an estimate of how many that leaves us at the old site?
About 70,000 in crude oil and ethanol service, of which about 42,000 are actually crude oils transportation service.
Thank you. A question, Mr. Rowe, you mentioned about identifying or having to define hazmat. Right now, is crude oil defined as a hazmat for purposes of transportation?
My colleague.
Yes, sir. Crude oil is defined by Federal Department of Transportation. It sets forth the definition of any hazardous material or substance that would require special handling, procedures, paperwork, and packaging for its transportation.
I appreciate that. The improved cars, are they double hull or are they just thicker hull?
There's a combination of both. They all have thicker hulls, and we have to be 9/16 thick shell without a jacket. If it has a jacket, some of them have a jacket on top of that, but it still has to, they will come up to 9/16 inches thick.
Well, the reason I asked is I heard a lot of discussion in the shipping industry about double hull and a lot of the resistance was the expense, and certainly building a ship is much more expensive than building a rail car. I don't take it lightly though, about the expense of any of those items.
Right.
But I think the process of double hull, even if it's not a catastrophic explosion, but the process of double hull is more ensuring against a spill. Because it's not, less likely of a breach. I think they use that in race cars, but they open the tires in the air. Gives that resilience, you can do that. So not for today's discussion, but I'd be curious if the industry is going to work toward accepting or voluntarily doing the cost to their client, a double hull type of vehicle, if it proves to be engineering-wise safe.
Well, so new PHMSA is coming out with a rulemaking, and back in November, we filed comments to the advance notice public rulemaking, the railroad industry did collectively. And we recommended that standards above and beyond what are out there for this new rail car that we're talking about now, the 18,000, which have thicker hulls, but also would have mandatory jackets with thermal protection between the shell and the jacket. Thermal protection is very important with respect to fires, adjacent pool fires, to prevent cars that may not be punctured from blending, boiling liquid, expanding vapor explosion. Right now, without that thermal protection, generally you have about an hour or two before the adjacent cars will reach a point of electric tear. And the thermal protection we recommended have standards that will increase that to approximately 13 hours of heat, which gives emergency responders a lot more time with confidence to get in and put out a fire with foam, for example.
That's good to know.
And there's some other things added to that with full height head shields on each end of the car, and with some valve technology that won't shear off, be absolutely have to shear off if there is a derailment and these cars hit one another or something else that might cut off a valve. And one more thing is higher capacity relief valves for these cars. In other words, before they levy, they would release the content.
That's excellent ideas that are being made about
Yeah.
there. My last question before I turn over to the committee member, I want to ask is the rail themselves, the safety of the rail themselves. I know both of you reference a more heightened inspection, more frequency of inspection. Is there anything that we're looking at that we can assuage the fears of people, the fact that it was just a neglected infrastructure that contributed to things? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I know we're talking,
Yes.
25,000, 21,000 miles CSX, 25 in the state. And every mile that goes by a home, and, I would like to see, if we're going to do an inspection of these things, that those get specific attention to highly residential areas. But I leave that to your dialogue with things. But are there any plans to invest? When we talk about investing in infrastructure, I'm talking about nationally, not just in the state of Delaware. Investing in infrastructure, it has to require a heavy, significant investment in rails.
Yes,
we can't live in the dark age.
It does.
It's all Europe.
CSX, I'm sure, has similar comments or additional comments. I'll say this, each year Norfolk Southern spends between $2 and $2.5 billion on capital improvements. Most of those capital improvements go toward infrastructure, and most of that infrastructure capital goes toward rail, both rail maintenance and upgrades. It costs a lot of money for railroads to maintain the roadbed to safely and efficiently move its goods. So CSX testified somewhere generally between 15 and 17% of our total revenue goes back into capital every year, which is probably 4 to 5 times more than most other industries and all other businesses we can think about that have to spend as a percent of their total revenue. But it's just very expensive, but it's necessary. And if you want to add anything to that, have another comment.
No, David, I think you said it very eloquently. Thank you for that. Before I go on to that, one very quick point regarding the cars that I think is appropriate to make for this committee, and that is that you heard Mr. Julian several times say we made recommendations, and that is because in most cases the rail industry actually is not the owner or purchaser of that rail car. While we work very closely with our shippers who typically make that investment and bear that cost to look at each and every one of the aspects of that safety system that we call the package or the tank car. CSX actually doesn't own any tank cars. We simply want it packaged, put together, secured properly, labeled, placarded. We accept that in transportation. With regards to our rail inspection and safety processes, the 22 to 25 miles we operate in the state of Delaware is a class of track that gets, at minimum, twice a week, visual inspection by a human going out, looking at that track, doing measurements like the gauge, which is very important to its function, its cross level, as well as its alignment, to ensure that it's in a fit condition for operation. I would yet confirm that we invest between 16 and 18% of every single dollar. That 16 to 18 cents goes right back into our physical network. And like the Norfolk Southern, like all the other railroads, the places that gets consumed and taking care of the integrity of our track is typically in both the rail and the cross ties. So you will find that we replace approximately 3 million cross ties per year, and those give you the physical substructure to ensure the integrity of your rail. And then we do hundreds of miles of rail replacement each and every year.
And Mr. Chairman, just one additional thing, I don't know if Mr. Julian mentioned it, but the February 20th agreement with the U.S. Department of Transportation does include enhancements to rail inspection along our key crude oil unit train lines.
That's right. Like CSX in Delaware, we do, for our crude oil routes here, we do two visual inspections per week. Also important is two other types of inspections that are required by federal regulation and above and beyond those. Internal rail defect testing through cars that specifically measure if the rails have any flaws in them, have any cracks that are stressed, things like that. This agreement with DOT says that we will do one more of those type of inspections above and beyond what we currently do. Norfolk Southern typically does internal rail inspections between 3 and 4 a year, depending on the crude oil routes and depending on the tonnage on those particular rails. We will be doing an additional one of those internal rail inspections, as well as we're required to do, we do geometry testing, which measures the distance of the rail relationship to one another, the width, the height, the cant, the cross level, so that we maintain the correct measurement for the relationship between the two rails. So we have to do minimum of 2 of those a year on all our rail lines as well.
And I appreciate it, and I sympathize that, yeah, when something happens, an incident happens, they don't say a client, name a client, his crew went off the track, they say, well, Southern train went off, the CSX train went off the track, you know, so I know it's even in your best interest to prevent these things. One last question, then I'm done, for you, and that is, you saw the PowerPoint of the proximity of the Acela going by, the moving
Yes.
car. I understand that's an impossibility to try to route that so timely a fashion that you're not going to have that incident. But Norfolk Southern also stores cars there, and I would hope there would be some consideration to thinking about either those cars, if they do contain product, that they be stored somewhere else, maybe on a client's site. But I know that they're pretty much fill up at any given time, and they can speak to that.
Yeah.
But you know what I'm saying? But it is a frightening prospect to understand that there are cars stored there, even for and if it's a significantly small part of the day, that if the derailment of that high-speed line, you know, we have almost like a missile going into that.
I understand the concern there, obviously, and it's
Just for
yeah,
your consideration, I don't expect an answer to that.
That's right, we're committed to examine that. I will say a little bit of confidence in that it's highly unlikely that will occur, because that track, both the rail and the Amtrak track, is the highest classification of safe track in America right through there, so it's unlikely that it's going to be a derailment through there. But I understand the concern if there were one and striking some of the adjacent cars.
And it's a concern certainly for residents. And it's always going to be a traffic. With that, I just want to introduce another committee member showing up here, Representative Schmidt.
Thank you.
And anyone that's your legislators that have any questions, follow-up? Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I'd like to thank the chairman for having this hearing today, as well as the other members of the Energy Committee. I think this dialogue is good for everyone. And although we've been having meetings, railroad as well as the refinery, since this influx of crude coming out of the state, it seems like every time we have a meeting, I learn something new. And actually, I just learned from our last meeting, and I was concerned when Mr. Julian was speaking about the rail cars. I didn't realize until our last meeting that they didn't own the rail cars, that the rail cars were owned by a refinery. And even when you were giving your presentation, you were giving your presentation in the sense that Norfolk Southern was providing these rail cars with these new safety features. So what is Norfolk Southern's role in inspecting these rail cars?
First of all, we're talking specifically tank cars are the ones that railroads typically don't own. Yeah, the other types of equipment generally we do own. This is just an exception because of different specifics of commodities and shippers that your preference to own or lease the tank cars. We've been very much advocating the rail industry improve standards for the tank cars, because not that the tank cars themselves are unsafe that are moving today, particularly the legacy cars, is that we believe, we know that there are ways to improve the safety of those cars for that particular commodity that they're handling, crude oil, ethanol, flammables, things like that. So we'll clarify that. As far as inspections, heavily regulated by both the FRA, Federal Railroad Administration, with respect to maintenance and inspection, as well as the Association of American Railroads agreements. When for example, when crude oil cars come in and interchange off another railroad to us in Chicago, interchange requirements are that cars must be inspected when you receive those cars and thoroughly inspected for all the safety appliances and anything else that we can determine may be wrong with them, and we have to reject them in interchange. They're also inspected several times en route to their destination, to Delaware in particular, for example. As trains enter yards and they terminate in a particular yard or terminal on the route through here, they will be inspected once again before do a brake test and release them for movement on to the destination. There are also other FRA regulatory requirements and AAR requirements with respect to maintenance, longer-term maintenance. Depending on the type of rail car it is, tank car it is, there are certain intervals that they must be shopped and inspected, as well as, say, wheels changed out, roll bearings changed. Other times that they have to go into shops for major maintenance, rehab, rebuild. So there are a lot of crucial steps with respect to car maintenance and as well as car inspection, and the Federal Railroad Administration also has inspectors all over all the railroads to make sure that and enforce those inspections and that the cars are in good condition.
Another issue that concerns me is, and that explains your relationship with the refinery. I'm also concerned with the relationship with the Department of Transportation and the state of Delaware. You spoke about the infrastructure, and in my district, up until recently, up until this increase of transportation of crude, the rail or the infrastructure in my district was more or less abandoned in a lot of areas. There wasn't hardly any maintenance. Even when it came to rail crossings, it was I had a hard time getting rail crossings repaired. I would go to DelDOT, they say, well, we have to get with the railroad. The railroad is say, well, it's DelDOT's responsibility. But in the last year or so, they repaired a lot of railroad crossings in the state, and that's a good thing.
Right.
But how's your relationship to the Department of Transportation in the state as far as addressing concerns? I understand you're doing work at Porter Road, or completed work at Porter Road.
We spent, we spent over about $2 million recently enhancing up in that area you're talking about, the road. As far as the Delaware DOT, there has recently, February, there was a letter written outlining all the crossings that we want to jointly inspect using high rail vehicles. Move across those crossings, inspect them, determine if anything needs to be done to improve the crossing surface at those points. Work together to also enhance through public funding, which is the way it's done through the federal budget, you probably know, grade crossing protection. So our intention and desire is that we further improve and enhance our relationship with Delaware DOT and address all the issues that are concerned both.
And if I might interject, on the agenda, we're going to have DOT and as part of transportation, Newcastle County OEM at the table also speaking, and that way we can have more of a dialogue on that matter, that subject. Are there any other questions?
One last question before.
No, I don't mean to interrupt you, sir.
Okay, one last question. You spoke of two routes that the trains take as far as going to the refinery. Is there a designated route, or are you planning on using both routes?
There's a primary route, but there's the second route is also a viable route for us to take, depending on the traffic coordination and queuing that come down, so to the refinery. So both are routes. The primary route is the one I spoke of.
Through Porter Road. Thank you.
Representative Sinsky, then Representative
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank everybody for showing up today. I'm appreciative of the training and everything that the railroad's doing and PBF's commitment to do safer tank cars. And I'm aware of the economic impact of bringing in fracking oil to the refinery and to the state. And I'm aware that our first responders are trained in how to deal with a petroleum fire. And Norfolk Southern, I know you're having some training programs, but these are in controlled situations. And I know the refinery is well trained on fires, but again, that's in a controlled situation that has the infrastructure. They have the equipment on hand. They have the water supply. What I'm concerned about, and what I'm hoping state first responders are doing, is the planning phase for the rails. There is no infrastructure along the rails for water supply in case a tragedy does happen. And I'm not asking that we install infrastructure, but I'm hoping somebody from the state is looking at the rail lines, looking at the hot zones, crossings, the Amtrak site, and planning for the worst case scenario. These rails are in isolated areas, and how far are they from a hydrant? I know water is crucial. I know it takes foam at 3% concentration, but the majority of it needs to be water, and there's going to be a lot of water needed for cooling for the cars that aren't on fire to keep them from boiling over and rupturing. So, my concern is, and I'm hoping somebody from the state is taking the lead on this, because I know there's many first responder agencies, and I know they're quite aware of how to deal with a petroleum fire in a controlled situation. But these rails are in isolated areas, and I'm hoping what can be taken from this is an initiative to plan. And if there is an area where and it's a hot area, like a crossing, where a vehicle may run into a tank, and there is water supply issues, then maybe we need to look at putting some water supply in infrastructure. But as long as there's plans, I want to make sure that this is because this is not going to go away. I don't see pipelines coming in anytime soon. So I feel much more comfortable if we, as a state, had these plans in place. So, I still get I'm from the fire protection industry, and I still get the NFPA journal. And you'll see in there every once in a while there'll be a disaster. And then you'll see it'll hit the magazine, and it will be learning points. What we learned from this disaster. Well, I don't want Delaware to be an NFPA journal story on what was missed and what was learned. I'm hoping we plan now. And the only other question I had is, the rail inspection is one thing, but what about bridges? I know along Route 72, there's a 1918 stone bridge. It's not big, but it's pretty old. Now, I can't see the railroad doing bridge inspections. I would think it would take an outside contractor or someone to do that. So I want somebody from the state to answer, or address the planning part, my first part of the question. The other one is about bridge inspections. Thank you.
Representative, I do have listed in there, we're gracious enough to join us, Dima, Enrique, Della, and even Will Matthew. We're going to get, hopefully, to those things. I just want to work through the immediacy of questions for the rail car delivery group, the CSX and amongst others.
I just have two questions. One was a piggyback off of State Representative Johnson. He talked in terms of the infrastructure and the Norfolk Southern, but for me, CSX is in the city, and when Representative Kaczynski mentioned the bridges, you have several bridges that you have, and I'm concerned about the weight capacity of it transferring over. They're in horrible condition, and they're an eyesore. You guys haven't painted them for years, so I want you to take care of that as you look at the infrastructure. But I know you, Mr. Chairman, are you going to open up to any public or?
If time allows, right now, we have
and I'll say
another.
this because I've been working with Scott Spencer,
Yeah.
who knows rail very well, and we were looking at the emergency response, and I just want to mention a couple of things that he brought to my attention. He can mention some additional ones. Equipment, and this is related to the Crude trains moving, equipment and buffer cars at both the front and rear of every unit with crude oil. What this would allow, if an incident was to happen, and you didn't have a set fixed location, at least on a moving train, you can deal with this situation with phone dispensing equipment. Of course, you would have protective gear for emergency first responders. I mentioned firefighters with phone concentrator and other equipment that may be identified by emergency response experts. So that would kind of be there with the trains, so it would be portable instead of fixed location.
I appreciate that. I did.
And he has more
Yeah.
than that we can ask.
Yeah, I did actually invite Mr. Spencer to talk about this. Are there any other questions for the committee for the railroad? And I want to move on, and as time allows, I'm going to that one, sir, you stay here, jump in. I'll move on to the PDF and the American Petroleum Institute. The representative here is Mr. Seahart and Mr. Searles.
So I need your first.
Yeah, we're going to pick that up. And the question is, on the agenda is certainly product volatility. And feel free, if you have a prepared statement to make it, if not, then feel free to consider. Is there more volatility, or is it just that the circumstances have become more congested? And if so, also, how about empty cars? Are they volatile? I know a gas tank empty is much more volatile than a gas tank full. I mean, that's the extent of my engineering and expertise. So, either of you would like to comment that is the Bakken crude and/or the tar sands crude more volatile? Is it because of something we can take out of it or add into it to make it less volatile? Is it more transient?
I can go first, and Mr. Searles can follow. Bakken crude oil is a light crude oil. Bakken crude oil, there's many different types of crude oils in the world, and some are light, some are heavy. Bakken is a lighter crude oil. Lighter crude oil means it has some lighter materials in it. To use an analogy, gasoline needs some lighter materials so that you can run your car. You need to have some lighter materials in gasoline. And Bakken crude oil is the same way. It has some of these lighter materials. It's naturally occurring. So is it a volatile material? It's a light crude oil, and yes, it's pretty volatile. What that means when you talk about volatile is they measure certain things in the crude oil. They measure initial boiling point. Where does this stuff first start to boil? And they also measure flash point. And in fact, that's how you categorize crude oils when you load them onto rail cars. And they have, the rail folks know way better than I do, but they have different packing groups. Those packing groups are used for a number of different things, emergency response, but they're also used to say, are the rail cars we're using appropriate for that type of material? And Bakken crude oil and the rail cars that we're using are completely compatible. Those rail cars are designed to handle that particular material. Mr. Chairman, if I can go back to, I'd just like to add one thing to the record if I can. We talked about the different types of rail cars and the different models of rail cars. And I know a number of folks know this, but those who don't know, when PBF Energy first decided that it, as every other refinery on the East Coast, needed to be able to utilize those raw materials that are becoming more abundantly available in North America, the priority was going to be on how do we do this thing safely, reliably, and in an environmentally responsible manner. So when that decision was made, we decided right off we were going to use the latest state-of-the-art cars and invest in those cars. So PBF invested well over $100 million in its rail facilities on the plant, continues to invest in its track facilities, and we've invested many millions of dollars in new rail cars. Our plan is to completely use all of our own rail cars as was described. At the time, by the way, today as we speak, the standard that was referenced, the DOT 111, is the current standard. That is the current standard. Everything else is a recommendation. In October of 2011, the American Association of Railroads recommended what has been referred to as the CPC 1232, which was an enhanced rail car from a safety standpoint. At that point in time, when we decided we were going to move rails, we said we will purchase a complete fleet of rail cars of the higher standard. And as we speak today, we have ordered 5,900 cars, which would be more than enough for our usage. We have 3,100 already delivered to us. We've had enough delivered to us, and again, Mr. Julian talked about what percentage of old versus new there are. We already have 3,000 to 18,000 in our possession. We have so many of those cars at this point in time that we have decided from a safety standpoint that we will not accept any light crude into the refinery as of April 1st, which is next week. We will not bring anything into the refinery that is not a CPC 1232 car. So we will not use the current DOT 111 cars, which is the current standard. We will only use the enhanced standard car, enhanced recommended car. Now there's another recommendation on top of that. The first recommendation was never accepted, but there's another recommendation on top of that. But that recommended car, that was the enhanced car that was recommended in 2011, we will be using that exclusively at the refinery for light crude. We also bring in heavy crude by rail, and by the end of June, we said we will not take any car into the refinery that is not the CPC 1232, the enhanced rail car. So we, as a company, have been way ahead of the curve. We will be one of the, I would suspect, will be one of the first, if not the first company to be able to exclusively move crude oil into the state of Delaware and into our refinery using only these safer cars that are available to us today.
I appreciate that. I think you've explained it very well. The lighter crude is probably, I guess, more at risk than, but you're going to go to a complete conversion of your fleet, which is, I think, the thing to do, rather than to wait till it the American Petroleum Institute.
Thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. My name is Prince Searles. It's like girls with an S for everybody that's asked wondering. It's good to be here. I am the Marketing and Rail Issues Manager at API. We represent all segments of the industry with more than 590 members who supply the majority of the product that's consumed in the U.S. we are in the middle of a revolution in North American energy development, and we have, this has been made possible by technological breakthroughs and decades-old methods of energy development. And these are the things that are hydraulic fracturing, the ability to do horizontal drilling, and this is opening up a whole new set of fields up in the Bakken area as well as other areas in the country. So we have set the nation on the path to energy security, which is a concept that was unthinkable years ago, just a few years ago. And in fact, if you went back to Nixon's era, that was where they first said, we got to stop importing so much of this crude oil. So we're actually in a place now where we can start thinking about and giving options for East Coast refineries, West Coast refineries to be able to make a choice of where they want to get their product from, and they can get it and source it from our own mid-continent, which is a great place to be. Our energy policies help us determine, and will in fact determine, how we move forward in this energy development leadership. We are in a unique position. This only comes along once in a generation, and so we've got a unique opportunity there. We've got a dramatic increase in domestic energy production that I referred to, and fundamentally this has altered the global energy markets and more broadly the geopolitical landscape, and it will do so for decades to come. It's interesting as a bit of ongoing issues. You had Russia invade Crimea, and the price of crude didn't jump. I think if you would have gone back and looked at the history of what happened when you had an oil-producing country invade another country, certainly things would have been much more volatile in the prices. And certainly we don't see that, and I think that's part of it because we are in the market now. We want meaningful and lasting improvement in rail safety. And this comes from a holistic and collaborative approach that is looking at accident prevention, mitigation, and response. And Mr. Rohde mentioned that during his presentation, and that is a critical thing to do, is to look at it in a holistic manner. So we are working with our colleagues in the government, in the rail industry, and with others on a continual basis to make sure that we've got this thing right. The Memorandum of Understanding that was referred to earlier by Mr. Rohde and Mr. Julian is a very good step, and it outlines the operational changes to improve rail safety. And that step is going towards our shared goal of improving rail safety in the U.S. And while it's true that 99.997% of the hazardous materials that are transported by rail each year reach their destinations without incident, the oil and natural gas industry is committed to getting to zero rail incidents. Because when it comes to safety, the only number that matters is zero incidents. Getting to zero will take the long-term commitment to working collaboratively with all the stakeholders and applying all of our best science, research, and real-world data in a thoughtful and deliberate manner. Being a safe steward of our nation's energy resources and providing leadership in raising the bar on industry performance isn't new to the oil and gas industry. For 90 years we have been writing standards. We have over 600 and we're counting. These standards provide a leadership and lean forward position that allows us to make changes ahead of what the regulatory bodies may require. This process that we use is accredited by the American National Standards Institute, or ANSI, which is the designated standards authority in the United States, and the same organization that accredits similar programs at several U.S. national laboratories. We have already assembled the best experts from our industry, the railroads, scientists, and engineers, and others to tackle some of the issues raised by the recent rail incidents involving the transport of crude oil. PHMSA, or the Pipeline Hazardous Material Safety Administration, Federal DOT, has committed to join our effort to develop a comprehensive standard that addresses the classification of crude oil, which is what you were referring to when you're talking about volatility. The question is, what is the, does this crude oil act any differently than other crude oil? And the answer to that is it doesn't look different than any other light crude. And what's interesting is also when you're looking at emergency response and you tie together how you respond to any petroleum fire, it all comes down to one guide, and that's Guide 128 in the Orange Book. And that's what all the firefighters use to be able to to determine, how do you approach the fire, how far is the setback distance and all of that. And so those pieces all fit together, both the classification of the product and Mr. Seedorf, is that right? He mentioned the packing groups and the classifications. All of these issues come together in one place, and that's the tank car. So what you do is you take your product, you analyze it to determine where it fits and what package it should go into. And crude oil is a very specific name that is given to a very specific product that is for DOT transportation. And so what that does is allow you to make sure that you put it into the right package. And so you end up with a class 3, packing group 1, 2, or 3. They all go in the same package. Your emergency response is all the same, regardless of whether it's the packing group 3, which is the least dangerous, to packing group 1, which is the most dangerous. So we're looking at all of that with our classification folk and building standards to that end. This is part of our industry's long-standing commitment to safety. In 2011, as we've talked about, the oil and natural gas industry helped lead the multi-industry effort that led to the significant improvements in the design of the tank cars, and this is what we've referred to already as the CPC 1232. And we have moved forward voluntarily, as Mr. Seedorf has indicated, with building those cars. There are at least 18,000, and I've seen numbers that there should be about 29,000 that are going to be in the fleet today of the CPC 1232s. By the time we get to the end of next year, we'll have 52,000 of those in the fleet, and that makes up about 60% of the fleet. And those are important numbers, because what that does is show that we are indeed leading the effort on safety. These standards were developed with nearly, over a period of 3 years with the railroads, the Department of Transportation, the shippers, which is API, as well as the chemical guys, and they all looked together to figure out what is the best approach. They finished it up and they said, you know what, we need to look at this thing again and make sure we got it right. So they did an 8-month review of that same standard. And so ultimately we came up with CPC 1232. What the representatives from Norfolk Southern and CSX have indicated is that there was a change that was made at the end of last year by the railroads, and it's important to recognize that that was a railroad position and no longer the industry position, where the other, which is the CPC 1232, was developed on an industry-wide basis. So just to move through it and to finish up, we are working with the railroads on emergency response. We think this is a critical place for everybody to be focused on. I think that the opportunities are there to be able to share best practices for what our responses are with pipelines and with refineries and with marine. How do we go about doing that? There are excellent standards that are already out there that the railroads are using, but by our participation with them, because they are indeed they are the primary responders to any incident that happens in a derailment. But we want to make sure that the best information is out there. And so with that, we're working with Transcare, we're working with the National Association of State Fire Marshals. We are looking at all the different opportunities there are to be able to go out and train and provide that information. So with that, we look forward to continuing to work with the government and the other shippers, the rail industry, on a long-term, holistic, and comprehensive approach that ensures what we don't do is make a change on one place and make the risk just shift to a different place. It's kind of like a skinny balloon. If you squeeze a skinny balloon, you still have the same amount of air. You just move the air out to a different place. What we want to do is actually take that balloon and move it up higher and make sure that the risk has been, the bar has been raised, and that we haven't just shifted the risk around. So with that, I'll take a breath and be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, and I do have just a few questions for clarification. Is it is there a distinction that tar sands crude, does it have a higher or lower flash point than the Bakken crude, the light crude?
I'm not familiar with the flash point of the oil sands coming out of Canada, which is typically where what you'd be thinking about.
I can appreciate that. If we can get that information. Do you know, Mr. Cedar?
Yes, I sure do. Bakken, Canadian tar sand is a heavier crude. The Canadian tar sand actually is a blend of the, what they call bitumen, which is what's produced from Canada. Now some of it's processed there, and it becomes synthetic crude oil, but it's generally a blend of bitumen, what comes out of the ground, but because it's so heavy, it's asphalty, they do blend it with a gasoline type material, which they call condensate. But overall, it's a heavier material, and generally, it's less volatile.
Let's follow. But it would probably be more, a bigger environmental cleanup. We have people here that can speak to that. I just was curious, you know, I worked at a refinery for 25 years in Sweden, and that's how I repeat. But yeah, I got a little bit of a taste for, you know, what the different products, characteristics are. So I just want to pose that.
Actually, one of the things, I can introduce my successor, it's Jose Dominguez. I've subsequently moved on to a different position, and Jose is now the requirement manager.
Good luck. Good luck to you. Yes. Everybody in this room will cooperate. We know what business means and how to sustain business is important. So I just wanted to remark that someone mentioned about this sort of being an innovative technique. Well, I think it was John Rockefeller that first put crude on rail cars a couple hundred years ago, and had the inventive idea, which was at the time was probably the only limited idea. Now, economics have grown to the point where it's not as practical, especially with the tar sand crude, to pipeline that stuff. It's much more practical and less expensive than a boat to come in with a rail car. So we have got to take advantage of that economic opportunity and then protect the people's safety. Any questions from, yes, Mr. Johnson, Representative Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question goes to Mr. Cedar. Was it Cedar?
Yes, sir.
He spoke about the refinery being able to find the tar sands and the Bakken crude. Now, I remember recently we had several refineries closed on the East Coast. Matter of fact, Delaware City closed. But the reason why it was reopened, I was told, or we were told, it was because they were able to handle the sour crude. And they were, so you say you were prepared to handle this other crude, this Bakken crude, as well as the tar sand. Do you have to retrofit it?
No,
Refinery, or was it able all the time?
When we talk about the Canadian heavy crude oils, that Canadian heavy crude oil is no different than the other heavy crude oils we run at Delaware City for decades and decades. It doesn't, we had to do no modification to our unit to run Canadian heavy crude oil. When we first looked at opening Delaware City, you know, there was a model, there was a marketplace that we anticipated, and you know how we were going to run it to make it successful where others hadn't been successful. But as soon as we got it open and we started, and the whole dynamics of the industry changed, the marketplace changed, and this revolution that I can't remember one of the folks here mentioned of this growth in our own natural resources in North America. It was a game changer, changed all the dynamics, and today, as we speak, those raw materials are amongst the cheapest raw materials in the world, and we and all refineries that are going to operate in the United States, they have to take advantage of that. They can no longer afford to utilize more expensive raw materials from foreign countries, and so this is the paradigm. This is what our business model, this is what our economy is going to be based on. So it's, again, that change. I can tell you, I don't know anybody who predicted what was going to happen and how quickly it was going to happen. It was a game changer, and we responded to it as every other refinery that's operating in the East Coast has.
So it wasn't your plans?
No.
Real? No, serendipity.
No, we had no plans to invest $100 million plus in rail infrastructure.
Any other committee questions? I just have one quick question. Is the heavy crude, the tar sands crude, is it heavy by definition, such as the high content sulfur crude, which was my past history of experience in heavy crude?
Yes.
Is it a high sulfur?
You probably remember crude like Venezuelan crude.
Right.
Mexican, it's very similar to
And so everybody knows in this room, when the threat to the refinery was imminent about closure, we would have been closing our only East Coast capability of refining heavy sour, high content sulfur crude, which would have put us at a distinct disadvantage, and it come to fruition as an economic advantage for not having to depend on oil coming in, but oil shipments coming in from the East Coast would have no place to be refined. I think that's still the case, and so it's fortuitous that we've had this for the industry, and certainly for American energy independence to an extent.
And our model, Chairman, is to process both types of crude. We intend to process both types because they both fit into what we can do very well, but we need to blend them together.
Appreciate that. Now I want Department of Transportation, Newcastle County OEM, and I guess Dan Rick and Dima can engage this one, but let's do Department of Transportation and Newcastle County OEM, and let's talk about crossing safety, because there's a lot of consternation about not just the crossing safety, but also I don't want to call it inconvenience, because it's not inconvenience if someone's sitting on this side of the track, and I'm on that side of the track, they're having a heart attack. So that takes it to a different level. But have there been adequate discussions, and are we making progress?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Nicole Majeski, I'm the Deputy Secretary for the Department of Transportation, and with me here today is Jean Donaldson, who is the head of our Traffic Management Center, Adam Weiser, who is our Traffic Safety Engineer, and Bob Perrine, who is our Railroad Coordinator. So we've identified about 35 crossings related to the refinery that's on their primary and their secondary routes, and we actually have a list of those crossings with us here today. We can provide to the committee members. I don't have any copies for everybody, but happy to email that out so everybody has a copy of that. And as Mr. Julian stated, we have been working with Norfolk Southern for some time on the coordination of inspections and upgrades to their rail crossings statewide, not just related to the refinery, but statewide, because there is an extensive list of those crossings, which we can also provide to the committee if you so would like to see that. So Bob will talk a little bit about the coordination that we've been doing with Norfolk Southern on the crossings themselves, and then Jean and Adam can talk a little bit about the monitoring and the safety aspects.
Good afternoon, I'm Bob Perrine, Railroad Program Manager for Delaware, meaning that I am the point of contact for anything related to rail, any complaints about our projects, programs, inspections, development, that kind of thing. What we have done, and we started with Norfolk Southern because Norfolk Southern had a bulk of the railroad crossings in the state. 3 years ago, we actually started to jointly inspect the rail and the crossing. That has grown to the point where we now I-rail with them once a year at least, and we literally will stop and inspect every crossing jointly, every structure jointly to assess its condition. We are starting that same process with the other railroad companies in the state as well, and in fact have scheduled with 3 of the other rail companies already our joint inspections. Also, we are busy doing a comprehensive inspection of our state crossings and structures, and I mean at-grade crossings as well as grade separated crossings, to both identify their condition but their maintenance needs, where we are in the overall program of compliance with the FRA, the current FRA and the regional guidelines for record reflectivity and signage and roadway striping. intend to be done with that process by the end of this fiscal year. And that, of course, will generate some other projects for us on what our focus is, and it's always towards safety. This is very much a safety-related focus to make sure that any of the railway safety appurtenances that are associated with a crossing are current and current to every safety guideline. Now, what we brought here was a listing just of the crossings that are related to hauling crude, essentially, to the refinery. And each one of these has been inspected already this year. That part is complete. We did the crossing rating. And just some other information, we do capture all of our past history when we do go to a crossing, when we improve it, when we do maintenance, what we do, as far as signalization as well, what it has there, what its current condition. We have a yearly inspection requirement, planning as a reaction, which Adam will talk to you about in a moment probably. And we're in the process of doing those inspections. That's a new requirement, and this is the first year we've done that. But on our list, proposed actions, there's all sorts of things here. Some of them are replaced, and that, since we're talking specifically north to southern here, those are the crossings that we've identified that require replacement and not just some type of maintenance activity. Maintenance activity could literally just be sealing around the joints to protect from water getting in and helping ruin the subbase, to literally maintenance paving to increase just the smoothness of the ride for highway traffic, as well as actual removal of the crossings and retirement out of the rail inventory as related to the FRA. There's a mixture of all those in this list. We have several capital projects listed here. I think we've got about 9 of them, which is part of our safety program, where we are going to go in and upgrade the safety requirements at sites, as well as, potentially upgrade the crossing surfaces. We have as well some of our interim safety-related actions that show up on this list of these particular crossings, and that is where we have gone out to identify where we have pedestrian facilities near a freight rail, and unfortunately, there is no guidance federally to say what's a safe way to bring pedestrians across freight rail. It addresses for transit systems, but not for freight rail. So we've taken the initiative to develop guidelines to somewhat relate to what we see in our ADA standards nationwide for compliance, and we've adapted them to the rail, and we're getting ready to submit them to the FHWA and to FRA through the AREMA and the MTCD to establish these standards for bringing pedestrian traffic across the rail crossings. And we have a couple sites that we've identified that we'll be doing this year. We actually did 4 last year as our first test cases to get into that practice. And we have a couple on this list that we'll do this year, but overall we've identified about 60 that need improvement, but that will work into our program over the next couple of years. That's all I have.
Thank you, sir. I think we'll have some questions. Do we? Yeah, I'll let Representative Osinski.
I know one of the issues we were concerned about at the crossings was a notification of first responders so they can possibly determine rerouting when a 100-car length unit train is in the crossing. And I know DelDOT has been working on that. So my question is, where has that technology been figured out so our first responders know when there's going to be a delay at a crossing?
Thank you. I'm Gene Donaldson. I manage the Department's Transportation Management Program. And real quickly, that includes the ITS, or Intelligent Transportation Systems Technology, to monitor, control, and provide information. The other is the 24-hour Transportation Management Center. That's how we coordinate and manage DELOT's response to anything that happens on the transportation system. Incident event planning and operations falls under my section, and we fully agree that planning is critical in managing the transportation system. And transportation homeland security planning and operations falls under my section. So we're working on a variety of fronts. We've had for years worked with our response partners in creating how we can improve working together. We will continue to do that. As it goes for the railroad crossings, we have outfitted 2 crossings. The one on 40 east of 72 and the one on 4 and 72. With technology that now allows us to see when the system is in preempt, meaning we can't guarantee a train is there, but the gates have come on, the alarms have gone on, and that signal comes back to the TMC. It's displayed in the Transportation Management Center. We are now working on the software side that would allow that to go to the DELOT app that anybody can download and to our website. And we looked at that should happen. I'm going to be careful when I say because of developing software. But probably in the next 3 to 6 months that will be available. And we are also working very closely to tie all of our technology and systems into the 911 centers and eventually into fire and emergency apparatus and police vehicles. So we have one of the more advanced systems in the United States in Delaware, and soon we'll be able to demonstrate to you that we have it working.
Thank you, Mr. Donaldson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, I'd like to know the coordination that's required in repairing the railroad crossing. And I'll tell you why I asked this question. During the summer, I had a railroad crossing on in my district at Wilmington Road and Route 9, and it was scheduled to be done in a week. However, it took about 3 weeks. And I had one of my constituents that lived near that railroad crossing. I guess he would call me up every day. Said, what are they doing at this railroad crossing? I just walked by there today, and the workers are not working. They're just standing around waiting. And it, like I said, it took 3 weeks. I would call DELDOT, and they would tell me, well, they had to coordinate with the railroad, and they had to coordinate with asphalt, and as well as the weather. And they finally got it done in 3 weeks. And I told them, my constituent, I said, well, I can appreciate your concern, and the reason why it took so long is because they had to coordinate. But I said, if you think it was bad here on Route 9, you wait till they get on Route 40, because that's a big job, it'll take forever. And they did that in about 3 or 4 days. So what is the coordination? What is it all about?
Well, there were several things that happened at that Route 9 crossing of Wilmington Road. Unfortunately, due to a joint track inspection that we did, there was a track defect there, so we actually moved it up in the schedule about 6 months. And so we fit that in basically because of what we could call a track emergency if you use the emergency term like. We found a track defect there, so we wanted to have it. So unfortunately, well, we had been coordinating for the work much later in the year, and we didn't get to do all of that in terms of trying to get in there safely and do it. And unfortunately, during those 16 days that it took us to do that crossing, we had 7 days of rain. Well, we can't pave in the rain, and you can't put base down in the rain, and you can't excavate in the rain, or you have a mess. So I'm not aware necessarily of any time that there were people standing around doing nothing. However, as we did get in there and do work and try and coordinate with the city, we found out that there was a 100-plus-year-old transite water line that crossed under the western side of the roadway. So we delayed a day to allow them to excavate that and inspect it, so that we could make attention. Certainly we didn't want to break it. It did cross underneath the rail, and unfortunately that excavation was right at the rail, and that's a slow process for an old transite water line. So we lost about a day and a half of practice for that, trying to be good partners with the city. Unfortunately, we were not able to replace it. But we did get some protection to it, and that base repaired. We also had some old infrastructure issues in the median, where we had some raised beds where there used to be an old signal that was in the center of the roadway, and a couple of inlet boxes that had been covered over that was in the railway clear zone. And if it's in that clear zone, 5 feet from the edge of rail, that's considered a safety hazard. We removed those. And then I had to get back in and do a full depth replacement of the roadway adjacent to the rail system. So there were a multitude of things there. Unfortunately, the weather really got us. And then finally, when the railroad finished and we could get in and do paving work, well, it was on a night and a weekend, and the asphalt plant's closed. So one of the bad things about being in a small state is you have a limited amount of resources like that available to you and when you could get them. So that took us through a whole other weekend. So there was a lot of unfortunate things that occurred in that particular case. But in the end, we did get a very good crossing. We're going back out there later this spring, early summer, to address the pedestrian issues I just mentioned that are on that west side right over the top of that water line, so that we have a up-to-date and safe pedestrian crossing. But Route 40, on the other hand, was a 3.5-year preparation. We fully closed the roadway and had several different contractors as well as the railroad there on site with every piece of equipment you could imagine and the manpower to go with it because of the full nature. The railroad themselves, Norfolk Southern, came in at 39 people. And we worked 24/7 around the clock on a plan in order to get that done. And in spite of the microburst tornado and I don't know how many inches of rain fell in about a 3-hour period, while we had the rail bed open, that it completely flooded over under 2 feet of water, we were still able to get the track in that same day and get the work done, and then finally get the road closed up. But a long time of coordination and planning versus trying to get in and take care of an emergency situation. That's what happened. And also to light about that Route 9 crossing, we spent more time working on that crossing than any other one in the state last year.
I know. All right, thank you.
Do you have a question?
Now, I'm just looking at your list here, and you got several in Wilmington rated in the worst condition, yet you had no date for replacement.
Well, no, the date there that you see in that column is the date that was replaced last.
Okay, I see Terminal Avenue was rated a 4. I see Pastor's Lane rated a 5. I see no date for those.
Well, again, what you're seeing is not the scheduled date, it's the date they were replaced the last time. But on our list here, this is part of our greater program that we've identified, and we are literally working that out right now with Norfolk Southern. We have a meeting with them next week to finalize what our replacement will be for this year.
Okay, if you could, and there are 5 and critical condition which you have here, just let me know when you get a date.
It's just often that those dates ironed out.
Thank you.
And you are planning to work also at CSX, even though it's a more.
Oh, yeah, this isn't, this just happens to be a.
I understand. I'm not suggesting that I get a report on that. I just, I make sure that that's on the radar, so.
We're working on 5 of the crossings with CSX this year. North College Avenue, their school, we'll be working on. Centerville Road, we're doing some improvements. We did a couple last year as well. So there's Maryland Avenue we'll be working on this year. So no one's immune.
Our local folks typically do a very good job of coordination, but certainly let us know if you run into any issues. We pride ourselves in coordinating as close as possible.
Thank you very much. And I want to move on to, we're running out of time, and I don't want to, if I could have DENREC, DEMA, any first responders, the fire departments, or Newcastle County Emergency Preparedness Team. I think it's the ones that can answer a group of queries or make a statement on it. One of them would be, certainly, what is the threat? We've read a few articles about the threat of toxic release in an inadvertent accident. Toxic air is that the threat to, and this is for DENREC certainly, what threat to the environment? In other words, would it be a consideration to have something like a boom storage site near ecologically sensitive areas or aquifers in the event of an incident? And then certainly the most important thing is the safety. If there is some kind of catastrophe that DEMA would deal with, and that the safety of those people that would be responding, the first responders to this thing. So anyone in this group wants to talk about it, maybe DENREC can lead off with what they think is the imminent threat, or what plans have been made to address any ecological circumstance, and then we'll get into certainly the responders and the DEMA and the ones that are actually saving us every day from these threats. They're unanticipated and certainly not wanted. DENREC, that's the way DENREC? Yes, ma'am.
Marjorie Cross, I'm the Director of
Hi,
Division of
thank
Basin.
you.
Thank you for having me. I have with me today Jamie Bethard, who's one of the 3 full-time responders that work for DENREC and had the primary response under the Delaware Emergency Operations Plan for handling hazardous release incidents. In addition to those 3, which doesn't, of course, seem like many, we have 21 other people that are trained within our agency that can assist us. There are 35 people in the Newcastle County Industrial Hazardous Materials Response Alliance, NCHMRA, plus dozens of people within the fire agencies and other responders that can assist. Contractors, incident happened from one of the trains, I'm sure the PBF and whichever rail company is their track would have their response people and also their contractors out there. So I think there's a lot of resources out there. We know where the booms are. In an event, the real issues would be, where is it? Is it over land or is it over water? What is it? Is it the Bakken crude from North Dakota, or is it the tar sands from Canada? And whether or not there's a fire. The first priority would always be taking care of the threat to public safety. We have air monitors within our emergency response vehicles to be able to check that. And then there would be only certain people, if they felt there was it, kind of, that could go in and deal with things. Because of the ability to suit up into the incident. Public health would also be a necessary partner in all of this to really talk, to be the ones to work with DEMA and whoever is the on-scene coordinator in a very large event, to talk about whether people need to shelter in place, stay in their homes, shut off their pumps, that kind of thing, whether they need to evacuate, or what the threat is to them, and that would be working through public health. First goal would be, if there's a fire, get it out. If there's a leak, stop the leak. If it's over water, we'd also be looking immediately at looking at any water intakes, either getting them shut off or moved off or both. Because you don't want it going into drinking water intakes, you don't want it going into processed water intakes for certain industries. Probably also booming, because most of our areas are tidal, so we'd be booming off either any tributaries to try to keep from going up the other tributaries, or up and downstream and try to maintain it. If it's on land, the one thing you might be, you're looking at the Bakken crude, it reacts very much like gasoline. It's going to look to sink into the ground. On water, it's going to float more. Ground, it's going to look to sink. So you don't really have, if there's a large release and it just goes, there's not anything you're going to do to stop it. But if you have something that's flowing, you're going to look to the heavier Canadian crude. There's more of a problem if it goes on water, because it goes all through the water column and sinks down. But on land, it's going to kind of stay there as just more the surface soils. But again, the first response would be to try to stop the flow, pump out tanks. Of course, if there's a fire, put out the fire. After all that is done, that's when you'd be looking at over-excavating soil. To get rid of anything that's contaminated, checking groundwater to see if anything made it to a groundwater source that could get to a public drinking water well. Of course, bringing in somebody like Tri-State to take care of any oil birds if it was on water, any wildlife damages. And then you always have what we call national resource damage assessments that could be done and looked at, saying if there was something lost. Degraded wetlands would need to be cleaned up afterwards, or fish kills or things because of the spill, that we'd be looking at ways to restore those and going after the responsible parties for that.
Yeah, and I appreciate that answer. I do know from experience that the refinery has a very proactive, when they were taking the majority of their shipments by water, very proactive emergency response in place. So I'm talking about for spills on it. We certainly have a wonderful fire department for those events, and we hope they don't happen. But it is also a responsibility that we as state agencies, Denver, including myself and Denver, have a responsibility for, and that is to mitigate any threats to the sensitive areas, ecologically and environmentally sensitive areas, not to mention certainly the very real effect of contamination of a major aquifer or something like that through this spill. And I think that those things would be rare that it would happen, but the circumstances have to be prepared for to mitigate that before it becomes a permanent threat. It requires millions and millions of dollars in cleanup to restore things. That's why I asked, and I don't expect an answer here. I'm hoping that Denver will consider alternatives to preparedness. As I said before, this was suggested to me by a very astute person that in a very sensitive area near a railroad, a crude carrying railroad train interchange, that maybe there could be boom storage equipment there, so that one get into the aquifer. And no idea, no particulars to give you. I just think that we have to prepare for that. That's our obligation. Just I know the refinery has prepared for those spills over water.
Yeah, NOAA just recently, the National Oceanic Administration Fish and Wildlife Service just recently updated their maps for Delaware Bay and looking at critical areas. So we have some of that, and I believe Norfolk Southern is also entertaining the idea of actually doing a video of their tracks to kind of look to see what's around it, and would help us really identify those places where they might be crossing wetlands or other critical areas that we want to look at.
Yeah, we've already mapped our entire railroad. We can show you anywhere you want to see from that perspective.
Any questions? Yeah, also.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, thank you for this handout. Very interesting. I've got some good information there. I want to have a question about the two exercises that's mentioned in his handout. The one that was mentioned earlier, I think it was Mr. Julian mentioned an exercise that you're planning on in August that you're taking part. And also tabletop exercise that was held in Kent County. My question is, who was involved in this tabletop exercise, and how often do you have these tabletop exercises? Are they annually, or are they?
I guess I'd like to look, I wasn't actually at that one, is there any of my days you were?
I was not involved in the tabletop at Kent, but I can speak to the exercises coming up in Newcastle County in 2014. The one for August 23rd is being sponsored by the LAPC through a FEMSA HMEP grant, and Norfolk Southern is partnering with us. So that's going to be a full-scale exercise involving fire companies, EMS, DENREC, state police, county police, Newcastle County OEM. So that's going to be a full-size exercise. Also, this Saturday, the 29th, although it's not a rail car exercise, DuPont Honeywell has partnered with the LEPC, and we're sponsoring a full-scale exercise Saturday morning in Claymont, involving a tanker truck, a leaking tanker truck of fumed sulfuric acid. So there has been a lot of exercises, tabletops going on over the years. We were very fortunate in Delaware. We've had a lot of visionaries. If we go back to the late 90s, we had John Mormon from DENREC and Joe Leonetti from Newcastle County, as well as former State Representative Dave Ennis and former State Representative and now Senator Bruce Ennis. They were visionaries in developing a process to meet unmet needs, to get quick mitigation efforts to support DENREC in a hazmat incident. We created, as Director Croft said, NICIMRA. NICIMRA is comprised of all volunteers from local companies, and we started out with 55 members. We're now down to 37. They receive no remuneration for their efforts, and we have been training them. We've done 289 hours of training since their inception in 2001, and every year since 2003, we've had at least one training exercise involving rail cars.
Very good.
And the one in Kent County was near the fairgrounds in Harrington. I looked mostly for that area around there. And the one truly great thing about Delaware is that all these different people train together, know each other, and that really will help should there actually be a real incident.
Well, it's always good to have a training exercise or a practical exercise, but I should also emphasize it's just as important when you have those tabletop exercises where everybody knows what they're supposed to do.
Yes, and Mr. Chairman, let me also say, Newcastle County enjoys great support from industry. We put together, the LAPC and industries sponsored it, funded it, an emergency preparedness guideline that we give out. The refinery contributed, and we've got 150,000 of these brochures that how to have a plan, get a plan, official radio stations, TV stations, and we try to give these out, distribute them at every opportunity we can through outreach, and so we've got approximately 100,000 left, so if anybody here needs some.
I know you and I have, actually, you've given me quite a few of them at the FMC polymer meetings, and I would suggest that you make those available proactively. There's a lot of legislators, and I want to welcome Representative Bombach to me, a lot of legislators that do community days, things like our Newark night, and that would be a very useful piece for them to put on the table besides the picture of their smiling face for a vote. I'm sure they'd like that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
We're never going to stop that, though. If you could put our faces on it.
Well, you know what, we did that with County Executive Coons, and then he got elected senator, and it was outdated. So.
Are any other questions for this group? Because we're going to move into the, I think, the fire response area. And whoever wants to take the lead on DEMA, I know you're sitting there, you said, not me. But anything that you can enlighten us? I know that there's been discussions about training you've gone through, and
I think the question, Mr. Chairman, that has been raised to help out here, I could sit and talk about the number of people we have trained, the level they're trained to, the equipment we have, et cetera, but the question that was raised was where are we going from here? And what is taking place is just recently at the State Emergency Response Commission meeting, Secretary Cirillo brought up and the fire school was heading up to work with first getting a survey of the 21 fire companies in Newcastle County and asking them what additional training requirements they feel they need to have, what additional equipment requirements they have in PPE, foam, and units, because we have things out there now. I don't need to go into that. We're going to address it with the 21 fire companies up there. If they feel there's a need for staging equipment, because in Newcastle County, that's the smallest county we've got up there, and everything is pretty close. But that is something that we're going to ask them about. And then the one that was raised was water supplies. And that's one that we've already started working with Norfolk Southern on, and working with DENREC on, in regards to looking at the various crossings, looking at how close we are to neighborhoods, looking at where we can pick our water up, and how we would be able to do that, to be able to apply the foam that's necessary. Once we get that and what their concerns are, we are going to schedule a workshop in Newcastle County with the fire chiefs and the officers, and include in that Norfolk Southern, CSX, the fire school, the Delaware State Police, Newcastle County Police, DENREC, Department of Health, DEMA, and when you listen to that, that's your state emergency response team, and also the Wilmington LEPC and Newcastle LEPC. We'll talk about the railroad and their response. The fire school will talk about the training that we provide and what we can do additionally, because we do provide training that includes JLDOT and the police, and our officers training, and then working with DENREC, how the state emergency response plan and the team responds in there and how we would handle that. That is something that is taking place now. The survey is being put together, it's being sent out, and then we will prepare for this workshop in which you all will be made aware of what's going on. But I will say, to answer your question, sir, we are moving forward on this. We recognize that there is a concern about this, but I can say on behalf of the first responders, we're pretty comfortable where we are right now. We just need to tie down some loose ends is what I think we need to do.
I appreciate that, and certainly let us know here at Night Hall about any equipment needs and plans that you're going to need some kind of funding for. It has to take paramount.
Oh, yes, sir.
President. I want to.
I'd like to comment on a couple of things, Mr. Chairman. I'm James Surratt, the Director of FEMA. Director Noonan has talked about the state resources which comprise the state emergency response team. Your former members, Representatives Joe DePinto, Dave Ennis, and Bruce Ennis, when he was in the House, introduced an amendment to Title 16, Chapter 67, Section 6701A, which is the authority of the fire chief's law. Subsection 212 was introduced following a series of hazmat incidents, all transportation, truck, vehicle related, no rail cars, that invoked or involved a lot of resources. I'm not going to go into the levels, but the final two levels, let me rephrase. The first two levels are controlled by the fire officer in charge. And there are people that come in, or organizations that come in and support them. The last two levels allow for the fire officer in charge to turn it over to the full state emergency response team, which Biff enumerated. It does two things for the fire department. Number one, releases them from the liability and control the incident, and more importantly, the financial responsibility. If you look at the cost associated with an incident like this, we're talking multiple $1 million, and the forethought was there years ago when that occurred. Second, I think you have to recognize, and I'm going to speak proudly for the fire school, they've been doing a lot of this training since 1967. And in fact, they have built a hazmat technician program that they continue to do today, in addition to the firefighting evolutions and theory. To the representative from Newark's comment about fire flow, and I'm not going to get into the percentage rates and all this, but I can attest to you that back about 25, 26 years ago, when Chrysler burned, we were flowing about 6,500 to 7,000 gallons a minute, and I know that goes out to the Newark limits on 273, where Avon plant used to be. I don't know if it's still there. I don't live in Newark. The other comment I would make when it comes to resources, both the refinery, due to API firefighting standards, is required to be able to apply firefighting resources and a specific fire flow in foam solution within X amount of minutes. And they have the equipment to do that, including large diameter hose. They also are required to have X amount of foam concentrate, which is part of the problem. It's part of, it is the high quality foam, and as the representative said, they introduced water to that to make their solution in the bubbles. And as I recall, they have 30,000 gallons of foam concentrate, which is a lot of foam. They also do mutual aid responses with the surrounding departments, because there are not many fire departments that are going to be able to flow that amount of foam, either in the refinery or outside the refinery. The other issue is the fire departments have a mutual aid agreement with the Delaware Air National Guard, where they can call on the guard when they have the personnel available to come off site and produce identical type of foam situations. The refinery and the air guards use saltwater compatible foam, so we can do it that way. The state emergency response team, as I said, has been involved since 1984, and it's worked pretty well. Don't want to take away the responsibility for the fire officer. On the latter two, he continues to maintain control of his firefighting resources, while the state comes in and supports him with a series of critical responsibilities which have been outlined in our state emergency response team plan since 1984 and in our state emergency response plan. And I'll defer to questions, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I have a couple. I think they're important in the context of someone for the public safety, but also in my own context. I was there at the refinery when the tanks exploded and melted down, and that was quite a chore to get a handle on that. And that's with a well-prepared, well-equipped fire company on site. If we had an incident in Newark, and a major train derailment with explosion, how quickly can we get the foam from where it's at now to that site, and can we get it there? I mean, do we have plans? I'm not saying you answer me now. Can we get it there? Give me an answer. I want to know how many tons of foam we can have. But do you want to tackle this one?
Yes, Mr. Representative. Dave Carpenter from Newcastle County Emergency Management, certified emergency manager, and I've been a coordinator there since 2007. But to get to your couple of questions, the answer is yes. To tailor off what Director Noonan said, in Newcastle County, we've been working on the local issue of responding to the crude oil trains for the past year and a half, since we deal with the refinery on a quarterly basis in a group called the DC Care Group, which is the Delaware City Community Awareness and Emergency Response Group. It's a specific emergency planning and response group made up of representatives of DENREC, DEMA, Public Health, refinery, all the industries around Delaware City. It's actually made up of the Delaware City Industrial Group, and then the town officials of Delaware City and the Delaware City Fire Company. That group, we started discussions a year and a half ago when the plant started considering the influx of the rail. That spawned off of further discussions on the issues brought up from constituents of the railroad crossings, which coincided with the meetings that we had with the fire, police responders, EMS, and DelDOT in order to work on the crossing issue and the notification to the 911 center. That has now evolved into, obviously, where are the resources and where can we get those resources quickly to the fire chiefs so that they can provide the protection that they need for the public and work with the issue. We have, in Newcastle County, we have a comprehensive emergency management plan. We're working on a specific rail annex, which is bringing together the rail companies. Matter of fact, they were just notified within the past couple of weeks to come together. Basically, we're utilizing in this thought process the model of the maritime industry. The maritime industry, as you know, set forth regulation and enforcement a long time ago to set up for oil spills and hazardous materials incidents along the waterways. We're going to utilize that model and try to put it in place here in Newcastle County and Delaware to try to stage resources or have resources available. The simple answer to your question one was, are the resources available now? Yes, there are near close to limited resources that we have, or more resources that we have that we can access beyond those that could be there within minutes of dispatch.
How about this suggestion? I'm just using my imagination, just peeking into the windows. The water tower on the Star King is what you fill up with foam, and that would be accessible to a densely populated area for these problems. Just consider it. Anyway, if there are no further specific questions, I want to thank everyone here. I apologize to the public. It wasn't to keep them out of the fray. It was certainly to get as much information as we could here. And I feel like I've ordered a 7-course meal through a McDonald's takeout window. I had to go on here. So your cooperation is very, very much appreciated. And I think that this was a good dialogue, but it should be the only dialogue. And that'll be next week. I'm talking about sometime in the future when the parties are aware of the progress they've made in their own venue, their own responsibility or cooperative efforts that have come to some kind of fruition. Maybe a new report on rail cars, maybe an improvement that has been made. I heard some good ideas here. The pressure relief valve. I think I worked at the Navy Yard for a long time, and there's nothing to save more lives than a pressure relief valve. And certainly would. I think when we're falling hazmat equipment is something you weigh at risk. Are we going to release this into the environment? Well, it's better than having it blow on. And so we do that. And I encourage Mr. Spencer to get a hold of the Norfolk Southern and vet his idea with you about carrying equipment on it. I think that would be appropriate. We're running out of time here. And any discussion of any new threats that may come, or any new improvements in addressing old threats that we see. Rearing its head in our rear window mirror so that we can proactively approach this. And I always want to compliment everybody here for their forthrightness, their honesty, and for also their engagement. And when I talk, it's easy to say first responders, you put yourself at risk a lot, but you can't understand or don't misunderstand how important you are to us and how important we are relying on industry to protect us as the citizens of this state too, and how important we regard the industry. The industry is not the government. The government provides service, protection, and all this, and for very little profit, none. And of course, and the industry is going to be driven by the circumstances of economic growth. As long as you keep your eye on the very real fact that the people say health, welfare, and safety have to come first. I think that's going to be a very minor part of your economic gathering, and I think that it'll be beneficial for you too, and certainly to my constituents. And I want to thank all the members of the committee and also the other legislative members of the committee. I want to thank Dave Benson, and I want to thank Peter the salad, California salad, Confortini. It's either a liqueur or a salad. I'm not sure if I was drinking what I eat. In any event, I do want to thank you all here. And I again, to the public, the next time we have this kind of adventure, I hope to have more time so we can allow you. I didn't want it to deteriorate any less information that we got. And it's 5:59. How's that for planning?
One thing before you close.
Yes, sir.
We probably have some questions that we didn't have an opportunity to ask here, so would it be appropriate for us to channel those questions through you, so you can?
I think we can do that. David, you can entertain it, you have the contact points for everybody, and we send them out to sort of a group, you know, who can answer this and who can answer what.
Thank you for hosting this.
Thank you all, I appreciate you all being here.